Rick Dalton wasn't the neighbor you'd expect to move into a place like Oak Ridge Glade. Tidy lawns, HOA-approved hedges, a neighborhood newsletter called the Glade Gazette. It was the kind of community where a crooked mailbox could get you fined and a trash can left out past noon earned you a strongly worded letter and a side-eye from every yoga mom within 5 houses. Rick, he rolled up in a mud-dusted F-150 hauling a trailer with 3 things: a deep freezer, a recliner older than most HOA board members, and a hand-carved bow rack. The man wore camo like it was a second skin. Tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s with a calm intensity in his eyes. The kind that told you he'd seen things that didn't involve spreadsheets or sprinkler schedules. He wasn't rude. He waved. He nodded. He even helped one neighbor lift a couch up their porch stairs. But Rick had the look of someone who wasn't trying to be liked. He was trying to be left alone. Behind his house stretched a thick patch of forest that ran for miles. Rick had chosen that lot specifically. The trees were his peace, his church, his therapy. Every morning at dawn, before most of the neighborhood even started their rigs, Rick was in the woods, tracking, scouting, or just sitting, silent in the brush, bow across his lap, Duke the golden retriever at his feet. That's where it started. The first report came in through the HOA's online complaint portal, an anonymous submission. New residents spotted in camouflage carrying a weapon. Unsafe behavior, possibly. Hunting, concern for kids and pets? The message landed directly in the inbox of one Karen Delacroix. Karen had been HOA president for 11 years. The kind of woman who ironed her volunteer t-shirts and believed her front yard hydrangeas could win a national title if the judges ever got serious. She saw herself less as a neighbor and more as a steward of Oak Ridge's soul. Everything, from mailboxes to mulch color, passed through her clipboard. So when she saw that report, Karen mobilized. She didn't knock. She appeared. Mid-morning, pearl earrings catching the sun, walking shoes spotless, clipboard in hand, smile sharp. As a carving knife, Rick was on his porch, sipping coffee from a thermal mug shaped like a deer hoof. Duke barked once, then sat. "Mr. Dalton," Karen chirped, voice sugary but clipped. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Glade. Just making my rounds, wanted to say hello and mention a teeny tiny thing." Rick nodded once. "Ma'am, we've had a few ... observations. A few reports." "Really? Residents concerned about seeing hunting gear, in the woods." She leaned in. "We like to keep things safe, peaceful, predictable." Rick set down his mug. "That wood's back there." Karen nodded. "Is it yours?" She blinked. "Well, no, but the community enjoys access." Rick cut her off gently. "So it's not HOA land?" "Well, not exactly. But we're working on an easement agreement." And Rick stood. "Not aggressive, just taller. I don't shoot toward homes. I don't hunt on HOA property. I follow state laws. Tag my deer, and mind my own business." Karen's smile twitched. "Just a flicker. We'll be in touch." She turned, shoes tapping on concrete, and vanished down the path. That evening, Rick found a letter folded and taped to his trash bin. Not mailed. Hand-delivered. It read, "Per HOA Policy 4.7.2, no hunting, trapping, or possession of weapons for such purposes is permitted within HOA boundaries or adjacent shared-use spaces. Residents are expected to refrain from behavior that could endanger others or disturb community peace. Further action may result in fines and suspension of HOA privileges." Rick read it twice, then pinned it to his fridge with a deer-shaped magnet. Duke looked up at him. Rick grinned. "I think they just picked a fight." The next morning, Rick walked into the woods with a GoPro strapped to his chest, state hunting license in his back pocket, and an idea already taking root. He wasn't mad. He was calculating. And when a man like Rick starts calculating, you don't get noise. You get strategy. You get silence before the storm. And Karen? She had no idea that she had just woken the quietest kind of hurricane. Word traveled fast in Oak Ridge Glade, faster than truth. By the end of the week, half the neighborhood believed Rick Dalton was setting snares behind the community pool and cooking raccoons in his backyard. The HOA Facebook group, normally filled with lost pet alerts and banana bread recipes, was on fire. "Did anyone else hear a gunshot last night? My cat hasn't come home. Coincidence? I think not. Can someone explain why a grown man is crawling through the trees behind my property in face paint?" Rick hadn't fired a single round. He didn't need to. The sight of him in full camo slipping into the woods at dawn had done the job. Karen Delacroix called an emergency HOA board meeting. Location, community rec room. Time, 6 p.m. sharp. Dress code, concerned, civilian. The room filled up. Quickly folding chairs, clipboards, iced tea and plastic pitchers. A few newer residents had never been to a meeting before. Tonight, curiosity dragged them in like moths to a porch light. Karen stood at the front, her posture military straight, as if she were about to deliver a report to Congress. Behind her, a projector screen displayed the bold headline, "Neighborhood, Safety and Unauthorized Activities in Shared Spaces." Then she began. "Neighbors," she said, her voice tight and measured, "we are gathered tonight because our values, our peace, are being challenged. Oak Ridge Glade has always been a place of harmony. Children play freely. Dogs roam safely. Lawns are mowed. Rules are respected. She clicked a remote. A blurry screenshot popped up, a still from someone's Ring camera. Rick, walking down his driveway in camo, bow in hand, Duke by his side. Gasps filled the room. Karen pressed on. What you see here is not an illusion. This man, our neighbor, is engaging in high-risk outdoor weaponry within steps of our homes. I've received 11 complaints in the last 3 days. One concerned resident described it as a hunting militia on our back doorstep. Rick sat near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He just listened. Karen raised her voice. This is a family neighborhood, and while we all support personal hobbies, there are limits. We cannot allow one man's wild instincts to endanger an entire community. She clicked again. The next slide read, proposed action, immediate ban on hunting or related gear within HOA perimeter and adjacent property. A hand shot up. It belonged to Glenn, a retired insurance agent with a birdwatching hobby and too much free time. But the woods don't belong to the HOA, Glenn pointed out, nervously adjusting his glasses. Karen smiled with thin lips. Yet we've been negotiating an easement. For now, we have a moral responsibility to set expectations. Another hand, a woman in her 30s, Marcia, new to the area. So he's breaking. Which rule, exactly? Karen's nostrils flared just slightly. It's not just about rules. It's about atmosphere. It's about culture. We don't live in the woods. We live in Oak Ridge Glade, a community. That's when Rick stood up. The room quieted like someone had flipped a switch. He didn't walk to the front. He just spoke from where he was. My name's Rick Dalton. I served in the Marines for 20 years. Moved here to live quiet. The woods behind my house aren't yours. They're state land. For now, my hunting license is valid. My permits are in order. I haven't broken a single law, and I haven't stepped one foot onto HOA property while doing what I do. He paused, looked around. But what I've done is make some of you uncomfortable, and I can respect that. Karen looked smug. Rick continued. That said, I'm not going to stop. Smugness gone. If you think you can outregulate me from walking into the forest on legal ground, go ahead, pass your rules. I'll read them, and I'll use them the same way I use my deer calls, just noise in the trees. Silence. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's nearly dusk, and that's when the coyotes come out. Rick turned and walked out. No threats, no raised voice, just the sound of his boots on linoleum and the quiet creak of the rec room door. Behind him, the HOA sat stunned. Karen clutched her clipboard a little tighter. She had tried to corner a man who knew how to move through shadows, and she had no idea that Rick wasn't retreating. He was preparing. It started with a phone call. 2 days after the HOA meeting, Rick sat on his back porch, sharpening a broadhead arrow while Duke gnawed lazily on a stick. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the yard. His phone buzzed. The caller ID said Walt Duggan. Rick answered with one word, talk. Walt had served with Rick overseas. These days, Walt was a semi-retired contractor who dabbled in real estate and land flipping. Rick trusted him mostly, because he was one of the only men who didn't flinch under fire and could still drink Rick under the table. I've been digging, Walt said. That forest behind your house, most folks think it's state land. It's not. Rick leaned forward. Go on. It was owned by a timber company out of state. Went belly up last year. Now, a local land trust is managing it temporarily. Whole thing's in limbo, but get this, they're taking offers. Rick's sharpening stopped. How much land? Close to 300 acres. And the best part? No easements, no conservation. Overlays, no public access points except ... You guessed it, your side of the fence. Rick didn't say a word for a few seconds. Then he said 6. Can you get me a meeting? The next afternoon, Rick drove out to a rundown office park 2 towns over and met with a soft-spoken man in khakis named Brian, who introduced himself as a land transition coordinator. He had the kind of handshake that made you feel like you were holding a damp paper towel. The forest parcels, a hot potato, Brian explained, tapping on a map. No utilities, no road access, no infrastructure, just a bunch of dirt and trees. Everyone wants it gone. Problem is, the board still thinks they'll get a developer to bite. Rick studied the map. His lot backed right up to the southern edge. The rest of the forest spilled north miles of dense timber. Rocky ridges, creek beds, unused, unloved, unclaimed. How much? Rick asked. Brian shrugged. I mean, ... for the whole thing. It's been appraised around $680,000, but honestly, I could probably push it through at 5. Rick didn't blink. He nodded. Then he said the words that would flip Oak Ridge Glade upside down. I'll pay in cash, but you pull it now. Quiet. No public listing, no bidding. You take it straight to the board and tell them you have a committed buyer with a short fuse. Brian hesitated. That's aggressive. Rick smiled faintly. So's a charging bore. That night, Rick pulled up his laptop and opened a spreadsheet he hadn't touched since leaving the service. It held every dime of his pension, his savings, a few investments, and the sale record of a patch of land he'd inherited back in Montana and flipped last year. The numbers worked barely. He called Walt. I'll wire the down payment tomorrow. Sure, Walt asked. It's a hell of a move. I wasn't planning on dying with my money, Rick said. Walt chuckled. Hell of a move, he repeated. Hell of a man. 3 weeks passed. Papers were signed. A drone was flown for surveying. Rick wore a borrowed suit jacket to closing, but still had mud on his boots. When he returned home, he stood at the edge of his backyard fence and stared into the trees. His trees. Not public. Not shared. His. He walked the perimeter that night with Duke at his side. Every worn trail, every dry creek bed, every old deer stand that had rotted into the earth. Then he hung the first sign on the southern trailhead. Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. He didn't just hang one, hung 51 at every trail. One at the old scout path, one right behind Karen's garden bench. Karen noticed first. The next morning, she went out to water her butterfly bushes and saw the sign hammered into the tree line. Bright red letters, new lumber, unmistakable message. She marched to Rick's door, fists clenched, lips pursed. He opened it slowly, coffee mug in hand, Duke at his side. Good morning, he said, not smiling. You can't be serious. I'm deadly serious. You bought the forest. I bought my peace and quiet. That's absurd. No, Rick said, sipping his coffee. What's absurd is thinking you can tell a grown man what to do on land you don't own. Karen was speechless. Rick shut the door gently. Behind it, Duke wagged his tail, and Rick smiled just a little. The signs were just the beginning. A week after Rick's acquisition, the forest behind Oak Ridge Glade transformed from a quiet patch of wilderness into something else entirely, something marked, monitored, and, most importantly, off-limits. At dawn, Rick installed the gate. It was solid steel, dark green, with a keypad entry system and 2 motion-activated floodlights perched on either post. It wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a message, a line in the dirt, and it was placed directly across what the HOA had, for years, casually called the Community Nature Trail. Of course, it had never actually been community land, but when people walk a path long enough without anyone stopping them, they start to believe it's theirs. Not anymore. The morning after the gate went up, Karen Delacroix stood on the wrong side of it, clutching her stainless steel travel mug like it was a grenade she might throw. She stared at the blinking keypad, mouth open in disbelief. She wasn't alone. Behind her, 2 mothers with strollers and a shirtless jogger gathered, staring at the gate like it was a crime scene. This is illegal, Karen said under her breath. But it wasn't, not even close. Rick watched from his back porch, binoculars in one hand, coffee in the other, not hiding, just observing. Duke lay by his feet, tail thumping gently. By noon, the HOA group chat was an inferno. Accusations, outrage, wild theories. He can't just gate it off, can he? I thought it was protected land. What happened to our access agreement? Someone needs to talk to him. Someone did. That evening, Karen showed up again, this time with Don Wexler, the HOA's vice president, who worked in commercial real estate and fancied himself a deal closer. Rick opened the door with the same calm indifference as always. Dan started talking before the door fully swung open. Rick, hey, we just want to have a conversation. Clear the air. Rick stepped out, let the door close behind him. Shoot. Don chuckled, clearly trying the buddy approach. Look, we get it. You're a landowner now. Big move. But that gate, it's creating tension. And frankly, it's in violation of community expectations. Rick raised an eyebrow. Expectations, not laws. Dan hesitated. Well, no, not laws. But we do have a shared use history. Decades of precedent. Rick nodded thoughtfully. Cool. So you trespassed for decades. Got it. Karen bristled. It was never trespassing. We used the trails respectfully. Rick turned toward her slowly. You tried to shut me down for walking into that same forest. Now I own it, and you're upset you can't walk through it in yoga pants anymore. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Rick continued. There's a list of authorized people. People who respect boundaries. Veterans, conservationists, researchers, not clipboard bullies and bad joggers. Dan stepped forward, trying to salvage the moment. Look, maybe we can negotiate something. Limited access hours. Community events. We could formalize it. Make it beneficial for everyone. Rick sipped his coffee. I already made it beneficial. For me? Then he turned and walked back inside. No shouting. No threats. Just a man who no longer owed anyone an explanation. That weekend, the HOA retaliated. They scheduled a trail awareness march. Dozens of neighbors in neon vests paraded down the sidewalk holding handmade signs like access is a right and don't fence us out. Karen led the charge, waving a clipboard and yelling about community integrity. Rick watched from his porch, sunglasses on, chewing sunflower seeds. He didn't say a word. Duke barked once. The crowd didn't get within 10 feet of the gate. Moose, Rick's new groundskeeper, was standing there, arms folded, 6'6", beard to his chest, with a look that said, try me. He didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon. The crowd lingered for 15 minutes, took a few selfies, chanted some vague slogans. Then they left. The gate stayed locked. That night, The HOA board met in Karen's kitchen. It was supposed to be a strategy session. Instead, it was a meltdown. No legal options. The sheriff already said, it's his land. What about eminent domain? Are you kidding? We're a homeowners association, not the state. Karen slammed her hand on the table. We are not letting this man win. We'll escalate. No one knew what that meant, but it sounded expensive. And Rick, he was already 3 steps ahead. The next move from the HOA wasn't loud. It was paperwork. Karen filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board claiming that Rick's gate obstructed historic access paths and violated unwritten community rights of way. She attached grainy drone footage, a 22-page packet of typed statements from angry residents, and one picture of a child pointing at the gate like it was a monster from a fairy tale. Rick received a notice in the mail. He read it slowly, quietly, over a bowl of venison stew he'd made the night before. Then he placed it down, wiped his mouth, and made a single call. Walt answered on the first ring. They're going after zoning, Rick said. Walt snorted. Didn't think they'd last this long. Let's make it more interesting. By the end of the week, Rick had filed his own paperwork. He wasn't just a landowner anymore. He was applying for a wildlife management exemption, a designation that would turn his private forest into an officially registered hunting preserve. With it came new protections, tax benefits, and most importantly, strict access limitations for liability reasons. He submitted a list of authorized personnel, a few old military friends, a wildlife biologist, to hunting guides, and himself. Karen wasn't on the list. Neither was the HOA when the zoning board met 2 weeks later. Rick showed up in a flannel shirt, jeans, and boots caked with mud. Karen arrived in a tailored beige pantsuit and brought along a lawyer who looked like he'd never been outside a courtroom. It didn't matter. The zoning board ruled in Rick's favor. The land had never been public. No easements had been recorded. The trail access had been informal at best. And now that Rick had formal use tied to wildlife management, they couldn't override it without triggering lawsuits. Karen was stunned. Rick nodded politely to the board. Appreciate your time. Then he turned to Karen, lowered his voice just enough, and said, You're playing checkers. I hunt with a map. That weekend, Rick hosted his first Veterans Hunt weekend. 5 trucks rolled in, flags mounted on tailgates, big guys with beards and stories you don't ask about unless you've earned the right. They shook Rick's hand, nodded at the forest, and went to work. They camped deep in the woods, built blinds, cooked over open flame, shared whiskey, laughed so loud the coyotes stopped howling for a night. The HOA was furious. Parents complained that their kids couldn't use the trail. Any more bird watchers were locked out. A local scout troop had to cancel a nature walk. Someone even left a handwritten note on Rick's gate. You're destroying the soul of this neighborhood. Rick pinned the note to a tree with a broadhead arrow. Then he mailed laminated copies of his hunting permits and wildlife exemption certificate to the HOA office. Each came with a sticky note, for your files and your feelings. Karen wasn't done. She pivoted. If the law couldn't stop Rick, she'd try the court of public opinion. She organized a Save Our Forest fundraiser at the community center. Banners were printed, flyers distributed, kids were dressed in tree costumes. There was a bake sale, a puppet show, and a woman named Cheryl reading poetry about ferns. It flopped badly. 12 people came. 2 of them were only there for the free cookies. One man, Harold, accidentally wandered in thinking it was a blood pressure screening event. Karen stood at the front, reading a speech she'd written the night before about unity and the healing power of shared soil. Rick didn't show, but someone filmed it and sent him the link. He watched it once, then forwarded it to Walt with the subject line, She brought puppets. I think we broke her. The next morning, another letter arrived on Rick's doorstep. No stamp. It wasn't typed. It was written in careful, tidy, cursive, Dear Mr. Dalton. On behalf of several residents, we ask respectfully if you'd consider reopening just one trail for community access. A small one. For the children. We miss the forest. We'd even be willing to sign a waiver. Please think about it. Sincerely, a neighbor who regrets voting for Karen. Rick folded the letter neatly and slipped it into a folder labeled Evidence of Cracks. He knew what this meant. The neighborhood was splintering, Karen's grip was slipping, and Rick was just getting started. The second night of Veterans Weekend brought a storm. Not a weather one, a quiet one. The kind of storm that brews in silence, behind closed doors, fueled by whispered meetings and egos too fragile to accept loss. Karen Delacroix stood on her patio, watching the tree line beyond the gate, her jaw set tight. She'd lost at the zoning board. The trail march was a failure. The bake sale was an embarrassment. And now Rick Dalton had a registered hunting preserve practically stapled to her backyard. She was running out of plays. Until Don Wexler, the HOA vice president, said 6 fateful words over wine and cheddar cubes during a board strategy meeting. Technically, we could document a violation. That's all it took. Don had heard from a cousin who'd heard from a guy in code enforcement. If you caught someone violating zoning or permit terms, with photo evidence, and could prove public safety risk, a land use exemption could be challenged. It's a long shot, he admitted. Karen's eyes narrowed. Then bring a camera. Saturday, 4:43 a.m. Rick was already up, drinking coffee by the wood stove. Duke snoozing on the rug. The rain had passed. The air was crisp, and the forest smelled alive. The kind of morning that made a man feel like the earth was brand new. Rick pulled on his camo jacket, strapped his hunting knife to his belt, and headed for the northern ridge, where he'd set up a trail cam the day before. He didn't know it yet, but 3 people were already deep inside his forest. Karen, Dan, and Cheryl, a loyal board member with an icon and no sense of direction, had slipped through a weak spot in the fencing just before sunrise. They wore all black. Cheryl even had a headlamp she'd bought for a half marathon she never ran. "This is illegal," Cheryl whispered. "It's not illegal," Karen hissed. "It's documentary activism." Dan carried a GoPro mounted on a selfie stick, trying to look brave while also swatting mosquitoes like a toddler with a wooden spoon. The forest was darker than they expected. Deeper, too. The neat paths they remembered were gone, overgrown, rerouted, reclaimed by nature. "What are we even looking for?" Cheryl asked. "Guns, dead animals, fires, traps," Karen snapped. "Anything that makes him look dangerous or unstable." They didn't get far. Rick's trail cam picked him up first. He was reviewing the footage on his tablet when he froze the frame. 3 shapes, breaching his fence, moving fast. Wrong time, wrong place. He didn't grab a gun. He grabbed a moose, and the 2 of them slipped into the woods, like wolves returning home. At 5:26 a.m., Don Wexler face planted into a creek. At 5:27 a.m., Cheryl screamed when she thought she saw a bear. It was a stump. At 5:30 a.m., Karen ordered them to stay quiet and keep moving. At 5:35 a.m., they saw something, a shape human-sized, unmoving, just standing at the edge of a clearing in full camo. No face visible. Don raised the GoPro, then the shape vanished. No footsteps, no sound, gone, end. That's when the voice came, not shouted, not angry, just firm. "Put the camera down." Karen whipped around. Rick stood 15 feet away, moose behind him like a statue made of mountain. "You're trespassing?" Rick said quietly. Karen tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Rick stepped forward. "Do you have any idea what happens when a registered hunting preserve finds trespassers on protected ground during active permit periods?" Dan finally snapped. "You can't do this, man. This isn't North Korea." Rick tilted his head. "You stepped over a gate with signs every 10 feet. You entered a registered zone during wildlife season. I could have called DNR sheriff. Had you arrested?" He stepped forward again. "You're lucky I found you first." Cheryl dropped her camera. Moose growled once. Just enough. Rick didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You've got 60 seconds to get out. After that, I call in a full report. I've got your faces, footage, timestamps, and by the way, your car is parked on a game trail. That's a separate fine." They left faster than they came. Branches snapped, mud flew, Karen's pant leg ripped on a thorn bush. Dan lost a shoe. Cheryl cried. Rick and Moose stood still for another full minute before turning back toward the cabin. Duke met them halfway. 3 men, 2 dogs, and 1 forest. They're still theirs. And behind them, a community about to feel the real consequences of what happens when you push a quiet man too far. By Monday morning, Oak Ridge Glade was buzzing louder than a beehive in July. The video of Karen, Dan, and Cheryl's botched forest investigation had leaked. Someone had posted it on the local Facebook group. The footage was a chaotic mess of whispering voices, swatting mosquitoes, tripping over roots, and one chilling moment where Rick Dalton's shadow appeared behind Karen. Just before she bolted from the scene, in tears. Comments flooded in. Some called Rick a hero protecting his rights. Others saw him as a bully, wielding a gate and a beard like a weapon. The HOA was in full crisis mode. Karen's phone didn't stop ringing. Board members demanded answers. Neighbors texted her, some supportive, some scornful. She stayed silent. Meanwhile, Rick wasn't celebrating. He knew the neighborhood was fracturing, and tensions could explode any day. But he had one advantage: the law. After the trespassing incident, Rick had filed a detailed report with the county sheriff's department. He included photos of the gate, timestamps of the trail cam footage, and his hunting preserve permit. Deputy Miles, a no-nonsense lawman who respected Rick from his military days, paid him a visit the same afternoon. "We'll keep an eye on things," Deputy Miles said, shaking Rick's hand firmly. "If they come back, they're looking for trouble." Rick nodded. "I'm ready for whatever comes." The very next evening, around dusk, Rick sat on his porch, polishing his rifle. Duke lay beside him, eyes half closed, ears twitching at every sound. Moose paced the yard, alert. Then, the quiet was shattered. A car engine roared near the forest edge. Just beyond the gate, Rick's heart thud. DED. The gate beeped twice. Someone punched in the code. Wrong code. The gate locked tighter. Then, a clang. Someone was trying to force the gate open. Rick stood and moved toward the gate, rifle in hand, flashlight in the other. He saw 3 figures struggling with the lock. 2 men and a woman. "Stop right there," Rick shouted. The trespassers froze. One of the men raised his hands, smirking. "We're not afraid of you." Rick stepped forward slowly. "This is a registered hunting preserve. Trespassing here is a felony." The woman pulled out a phone. "We're filming this." You better think twice. Rick raised his rifle, finger off the trigger. Last warning, leave. The men exchanged glances. One took a step forward. Rick didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot. A clean crack into the air that echoed like thunder through the trees. The trespassers scrambled back, dropping tools and phones. They fled. The next morning, the sheriff's office had a full report, and the local news caught wind of it. Oak Ridge Glade was on edge. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting, calling for Rick's removal from the community. Karen accused him of intimidation and dangerous behavior. Rick's lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Marcy, fired back with a press release outlining Rick's legal rights, the trespassing incidents, and the importance of property protection. Public opinion divided sharply. Some neighbors admired Rick's stand. Others feared the conflict would only worsen. Through it all, Rick stayed calm. He spent his evenings in the forest, walking the trails, checking cameras, making sure everything was as it should be. One night, Duke barked softly near a thicket. Rick moved quietly and found a small makeshift camp empty, except for a few discarded snack wrappers and a half-burnt cigarette. A message. They were still watching, but this time, Rick was ready. Karen's once solid support was crumbling. Neighbors whispered about her campaign of hostility, about how she'd turned a peaceful neighborhood into a battleground. Even some HOA members privately told her it was time to back down, but Karen refused. She vowed to take back the forest no matter what. Meanwhile, Rick prepared for the final confrontation. He wasn't just defending his hunting rights anymore, he was defending his home. The sun was setting low, casting long shadows through the trees. Oak Ridge Glade had never felt smaller or more divided. Rick Dalton stood at the edge of his forest, Duke at his side, watching as headlights flickered through the trees. The final showdown was coming. Karen Delacroix arrived with a small group, a mix of HOA members, local reporters, and a handful of angry neighbors. They weren't just here to talk anymore. They brought legal threats, cameras, and banners. They wanted a showdown, to reclaim what they called their forest. Rick stepped forward, calm as ever. Let's settle this, he said. One last time. Karen sneered. You've bullied us long enough, Rick. We're taking that forest back tonight. The crowd murmured. Some cheers. Some nervous glances. Rick's eyes scanned the gathering. But he wasn't worried because Rick had a secret buried deep beneath the very ground they were standing on. 2 years earlier, when Rick first scoped out the land, he'd done more than just research hunting rights. He'd hired a surveyor, a geologist, a land specialist. Why? Because Rick had been quietly negotiating a deal, not just to buy the forest, but to apply for a conservation easement, a legal agreement protecting the land forever, limiting development, and qualifying the area for historic status. No HOA. Access rights. No more debates. Rick pulled out a folder, thick with documents, permits, and maps. This forest isn't just mine, he announced. It's protected, permanently, under state and federal law. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face twisted with disbelief. Rick continued. I submitted the paperwork last year. The county approved it last month. This isn't about hunting anymore. It's about preservation. The reporters. Cameras clicked rapidly. A local environmental group had supported the move. Seeing Rick as an unlikely hero, your community can no longer claim access, Rick said. The forest will be a sanctuary. Karen's phone buzzed. Text after text, neighbors turning. Even some HOA members began stepping back. The tide had turned. Rick nodded toward the gate. Now stronger and more secure than ever. Enjoy your yards, he said quietly. Because this forest belongs to everyone, just not like you think. With that, he turned, walking slowly back into the trees, Duke following close behind him. The crowd was silent, broken, defeated. Karen watched him go, realization sinking in. Her fight wasn't just lost, it was over. 2 weeks later, Oak Ridge Glade was different. The tension had eased. Some neighbors had even thanked Rick for protecting the forest from development and destruction. The gated trail was open only to authorized wildlife researchers and veterans on special weekends. The community slowly healed. Rick's story became local legend, a tale of one man standing up, buying the forest, and changing the game forever. And the twist. Months after the dust settled, Rick discovered something unexpected during a routine walk. A small hidden plaque on an ancient oak tree, engraved with a date from over a century ago. It read, "Protected land by the Oak Ridge founders, for all generations." Rick smiled. Some battles aren't just about property or rights, they're about honoring legacies, and sometimes, to protect what matters most, you have to be willing to lock the gate, and then open it only on your terms.